Hi, I'm Dan Fishman. I'm the winemaker here at Donham Estate, and I want to tell you a little bit about your 2023 winter allocation wines today. We're featuring the wines from the 2020 vintage, which, as a lot of people know, was a challenging vintage across a lot of Northern California. Started out with some frost in the winter or in the early spring, and so that reduced our yields a little bit right from the beginning. And then after a pretty mild summer, we then had a big heat spike in August that led to some massive wildfires. And so because of that smoke pressure, we didn't want to have that affect the wine, so we started harvesting right away. We were able to bring everything in about a week, so we avoided any smoke problems. But because it was pretty early in the season, we wound up with a lot of wines that are a little bit lighter in style, a little bit kind of more red fruit driven, and some really, I think, interesting wines. So some wines that are a little bit different for Donham, but wines that we're really proud of and that I think show really well even with the tough vintage. First wine is the 2020 Ten Oaks. This is from our Russian River vineyard. This is actually the 10th vintage of this wine. This is the first wine that I kind of made on my own as winemaker, so special release for me. This is always kind of the lightest style wine from our Russian River vineyard. Features a little bit of whole cluster, and the name comes from the fact that there's 10 really nice oak trees that kind of surround this vineyard block. So I'm always looking on this one for a little bit more savory flavor, a little bit of earthiness. It's definitely still got that Russian River kind of black cherry, maybe a hint of cola, but definitely on the lighter side. Now, really nice structure. I think this was a good vintage for a wine like this that we harvest early anyway. We picked it right on schedule, got exactly kind of the flavor profile that we like to see in this wine. A lot of red fruit, a little bit of earthiness, and a lot of structure. Next is the 2020 East Slope. So East Slope is a wine that just came back with the 2019 vintage. It's all Calera clone. It's on an eastern facing slope, so it gets the morning sun and a little more shaded in the afternoon, which makes it a little bit lighter. The other thing that happened in 2020 is this block was hit with some frost, so the yield was incredibly low. We have less than 100 cases of the wine, but because of the low yield, it's very concentrated. This is actually probably one of the most concentrated wines of 2020. That said, it's not high alcohol or overly rich, but it is very densely flavored, a lot of darker fruit, really a powerful wine. This is one of my favorites. Year in and year out, I've always liked the East Slope style, and I think in 2020 it's got that extra bit of concentration, so a really interesting wine. For the next wine, we went back in the library a little bit to bring you the 2018 Carneros Estate Pinot. This is our flagship wine blended from across the estate here. It always has quite a bit of tannic structure from the clay soils in our Carneros vineyard, so this is a really nice one to check in on here a few years after the release. I always look for a specific flavor profile that I think is unique to Donham. It's a little bit of kind of a sassafras root beer type quality, along with a little bit of darker fruit compared to the rest of Carneros. So a little bit of black fruit, still some red fruit, really nice structure. 2018 was a really moderate vintage, so nice slow ripening, which leads to a really beautiful silky mouthfeel, especially with a little bit of age on it. The next wine is the 2019 Russian River Estate Pinot. This is blended from multiple blocks on our Russian River vineyard. Really, really beautiful vintage in 2019. We had one of those long, even growing seasons, no heat spikes, able to kind of harvest each block just at perfect ripeness. And when that happens, I find you get a really harmonious wine. The Russian River is always a little bit on the bigger side for Donham, but really beautifully balanced in 2019. Combination of dark fruit, black cherry, red cherry, just a little bit of oak there, really starting to integrate nicely after a couple years in bottle. Really nice structure. Really, I think the 2019 vintage is starting to come into its own. The next one is the 2020 Observer Pinot Noir from Anderson Valley. This is a new release in 2020 and really a new style of wine for our Anderson Valley vineyard. This is 100% whole cluster, so all the stems included in the fermentation. This naturally leads to a little bit of carbonic fermentation happening early, so that gives a lot of really bright kind of popping red fruit. And then the stems add a layer of herbalness and kind of like a black tea quality. really affects the tannin as well. It gives you a little bit more structure and kind of like a rougher edge to the tannin that will smooth out as it ages. But it's definitely a heavily structured wine. Really light in terms of alcohol, kind of leaner in terms of the mid palate, but lots of structure. Just a really compelling nose. The whole cluster really adds a lot of aromatic complexity. That's one of the reasons we use it. And so with this being 100% whole cluster, you really get a huge hit of those kind of earthy herbal aromatics. Thanks for joining me to taste through the winter allocation wines. I think with this featuring of the 2020 vintage, it shows that even in a difficult vintage, we can still do a lot of interesting things, make some really special wines. And I think it's also important to note how low the production is on all these wines. So this will be our smallest production year, hopefully ever, certainly less than we've made recently. So there's not a lot of the wine, but there's some really great wines, and thanks for taking the time to taste them with me.